heard disclose pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof for the agenda of this meeting, or for minutes of a meeting in which a member was not in attendance. Hearing none, I would also ask that any phones or such be turned to vibrate and cameras be turned off. Other than so, we have with us today Henry Wall. For those of you that aren't aware of him, I'm sure most of you are. Henry's the CAO of the KDSB, and I asked him to come today to give us an update on what's been going on, what is going on, and what could be going on. So it's all yours, Henry. Thanks for coming.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been a while. I think it's been just over 2 years since, maybe even more, since I was here. So thank you for the invitation. And certainly appreciate having the opportunity to do this, in that we find that we're much better at doing what we're doing when you also know what is going on. Because there's things that it really helps having council support, especially from a political aspect. And it's probably going to be even more important, just given what happened earlier in June. With a fairly significant change in government, probably a fairly significant change in direction, which then also impacts the work that we do, and to ensure that, I mean, for one, that our communities aren't losing services, that we're not satisfied with maintaining services, that we actually, families get the same access to service as they would in Southern Ontario. And that may sound like cliche, but I think it's critically important that we stay on top of that. And also to ensure that with all that we do, that always the right taxpayer pays for it. I think that's been, you'll hear a bit through that today. If I'm getting close to my time, I'm not sure how much time I have, I can kind of speed up. So I guess if it's boring, then you can just cut me off. If it's intriguing, then we'll keep going. What I thought today, one, I certainly want to focus in terms of what is going to be happening in Red Lake. I mean, what's happening now, what is going to be happening over the next 20 months, probably even sooner than that. But also in regards to what is happening across the region. Because what we're seeing happen across the region, while you say, well, it's happening in Silkit or Kenora, it's not really impacting Red Lake. Well, the way our net local share is distributed, Red Lake pays a significant portion as part of its levy to the KDSB, so you are impacted by what's happening across the entire region. So I want to touch on a few things. So today, I want to talk a little about EMS, what we're seeing there, and in that this is by far the costliest division that we have in terms of direct cost to the municipalities. And we're also seeing the most significant growth in terms of EMS service demand. And that's something that, moving forward, our board's concerned with. We're going to talk a little bit about trends and what we're doing to mitigate some of the impacts, but also, I think, politically, what municipalities should be doing in terms of what is unique about our region compared to anywhere else in Ontario. Talk about the state of homelessness in Red Lake. Some of the initiatives that are being, as part of this, one is the supportive housing project. The other is the emergency shelter future plans, but along with that too, transitional housing. So what we're working on in Red Lake in regards to that. Childcare expansion, not just mainstream. The municipality of Red Lake operate childcare, but also the opportunity to expand childcare for Indigenous families as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then also, why in the heck we're getting into other initiatives, housing initiatives that really aren't affordable housing, which has traditionally been the business we've been in, why we're branching out. So, and through that, I certainly don't mind questions. I mean, if you take questions through it, I certainly don't mind at all. So, jumping right into it with EMS, and if you put on your Superman goggles, you'll be able to see this. Now, you have a copy as well, and I have no issue being shared. So, whatever is here certainly can definitely be shared with council. Fort Red Lake, for the most part, our call volume here is relatively stable. I mean, we see some ups and downs. What is concerning is that the way the EMS structure works, we have 9 EMS bases throughout the district, that if we have, for example, a situation occurring on a Trans-Canada Highway close to Ear Falls, or even or between Kenora and Ear Falls, and Kenora is busy, Ear Falls gets dispatched. Then if there's a call that occurs in the entire geography between Ear Falls and Red Lake responds to those calls. So our deployment plan matters, but we're seeing huge increases like we are doing in Kenora. So kind of the middle charts, that is the city of Kenora. Like in 2013, we had about 3,600 calls, 911 calls placed in the city. Last year, we were at 5,100. And so our call volume in Kenora is increasing is in double digits, about 10% year over year, which is incredibly concerning to us in terms of, because if you see that happening in the cost for EMS too, you got to remember this is split 50-50. It's 50 cents on a dollar is funded by the local share. So the more calls, so part of what we've been looking at is saying, what in the world is going on in Kenora, and what in the world is going on in Sioux Lookout. Sioux Lookout last quarter, our call volume was up 28% over last year already. And so those numbers aren't even normal. I mean, they don't even make sense. And so from that, we've made a number of changes in terms of how we've been lobbying the previous government in terms of who should pay for what. We've been successful, both getting additional 100% funding for our crews in Sioux Lookout in terms of our position was that airport transfers from the far north. Now, to be clear, patients from the far north should have the same access to service as any other patient in Ontario. And so from that, their service level shouldn't go down as soon as they arrive at the airport in Sioux Lookout and need to be connected with the healthcare system. But at the same time, it's not realistic, nor should it be expected that municipalities cover that cost. You have a federal provincial responsibility for that. And what we had for many years is we had one crew, so the night crew was funded 100% provincially through a First Nation adjustment funding. And what we're finding over time is that the calls were actually even distributed throughout the day. It didn't matter over the 24-hour clock, but also call volume had increased substantially. And so this was in early 2017. We pushed quite hard with the Minister of Health at the time, and we were then funded an additional crew for Sioux Lookout at 100%. So Sioux Lookout, a community of 5,500 people, has 2 crews day and night, which is unheard of for a community that population. But at least one crew day and night is funded 100% eventually. In Kenora, I mean, we certainly non-urgent patient transfer has been an issue over the many years, but we're really looking at what's driving calls. And this is where I want to kind of look at this as well, is that when we look at our call volume, and when I say that our region is unique, we're not just making this stuff up or saying we need to be, we're the north and we'd like to complain. The fact is our call volume is flipped upside down in terms of who's actually using our service. In the rest of Ontario, it's over half is seniors, 65 plus. Over half all 911 calls placed in Ontario are for seniors. In our region, it's 45 years or younger. And when we look at this graph, so this does 2 things. One, it compares the provincial average to kind of age demographics, and then where do we are. So the Kenora is that red line. And when you look at 19 to 44-year-olds, the provincial average was 21%. We were at 37%. That's probably now exceeded 40%. It's just that age group. So there should be a healthy, productive age demographics in our community. And from this, it speaks to, I think, a larger issue that we're seeing, that you're seeing through your policing calls for services in this community, but also across the region. I can tell you mental health and addictions are a huge driver of 911 calls. When we look at, say, Kenora and so forth, it is, I would say predominantly, it is substance abuse types of related calls. And that's, I can tell you, putting more paramedics on the streets isn't the answer, nor is more police. Although you need to do it immediately to ensure that we still meet our response times, what we need to be looking at is saying, how do we prevent those calls from happening in the first place? That's the cheapest, most sustainable piece. The other aspect, and this is, we got ridiculed. Not ridiculed, that's a strong word, but certainly strongly advised that maybe it was a mistake, but we're the only EMS service provider that actually tracks by whether patients are First Nation or not. It's not a perfect science, but it certainly gives us a very good indicator in terms of what is actually happening to the health of our populations, including the populations in road-accessible First Nation communities. If we don't measure it, how can we actually say that we're delivering culturally appropriate services if we don't even know who's actually accessing the services? So that's been part of our reasoning for doing this. But when we look at that, then we do see some very concerning trends. And in terms of this graph breaks down when we actually do a demographic between non-First Nation and First Nation, and as you can see, it's not even comparable. For First Nation patients, it spikes at 21 to 30 year old, and then it goes down. And the truth of the matter is that in many First Nation communities, people don't live to be seniors; they die prematurely. It's not something that's talked about very often. That's the fact. That's just a fact. And at the same time, we have young men and women really struggling right from early on. The fact that we have such a high number, even of 11 to 20-year-olds, this isn't like kind of stagnant near 19 to 20-year-old people come legal age to drink. Our fastest growing demographic right now is 11 to 14-year-olds. So when we talk about youth centers, children's support services, this is a topic that really we need to start paying attention, in particular in the Kenora, the city of Kenora area. So this really has turned things kind of upside down for us in terms of how we look at lobbying the government, saying we have some serious issues happening here, but at the same time that we need Ontario and the feds to be at the table when funding these services, because I can tell you that by us just coming back to you and saying we need to have more funding isn't the answer either. And so in Kenora as well, what we've done over the last 2 years is we actually looked at in terms of where are our resources being deployed to. So I think you're the first council that sees this, but as we mature as an organization and then we strengthen our analytics, we're better able to present this type of information. But as I mentioned, for years it was believed that non-urgent patient transfer was the issue that's driving a lot of our cost. When we look at where our vehicles, where are our crews spending their time, and this is a utilization rate. So we use this to determine what's our deployment service level looking at. Usually you don't want to be, so this is of a paramedic crew, how busy are they? So it's kind of a measure of busyness. You don't want to be 100%, meaning that if a call comes in, there's nothing available. So the industry practice is that you want to be somewhere around 30% busyness, meaning that there's about 70% of the time when a 911 call comes in, there's a crew waiting. If you get beyond 30%, meaning, and the closer you get to 50%, meaning that now there's a 50-50 chance of actually a crew being available to respond to that 911 call. And so when we look at in terms of, in the Kenora region, paramedic crews are spending time in First Nation communities, we actually found in Kenora, we actually had exceeded 30%. In other words, we almost needed a dedicated EMS crew just for First Nation communities. I think it makes sense that we don't need to duplicate systems, but I went back to, and we have to go back to in terms of, let's make sure that the right taxpayer supports these systems. And so we've positioned or lobbied the Minister of Health saying that we need an additional day and night crew in Kenora, but it'd be 100% provincially funded, just so that we have adequate resources available to First Nation communities, just so that we aren't depleting our resources right within the city, if that makes sense. And we've been successful in that. We'll hopefully this under the new government that this arrangement will remain. But what that is allowing us to do is that we can now work with First Nation communities, see what kind of EMS resources do they need to actually have in First Nation communities themselves, like Grassy Narrows, like White Dog First Nation, in that it's realistic for us to respond is still a 90-minute response time. So if you're going into an emergency medical situation, you shouldn't have to wait 90 minutes. So what can we do to actually support communities so they can have the resources in the community as well? And that's something through memorandum of understandings and new agreements that we're moving towards, where we actually have a proper way of service planning, and we don't let jurisdiction kind of get in the way. So through this, we've been able to keep the costs to our municipalities level by getting the additional funding. But our concern is that if our call run keeps increasing over 10% a year, at some point we've caught up, and then we'll be back increasing. And I think Mark and I would have a very different conversation. I said next year your levy is 10% increased, right? It's not. We need to start preparing for that, just so that we don't end up in that situation. And as I mentioned before, like this is just at a very high level. of the net local share, about 16.8 million is covered through the local share. So that includes the Tumo area, which is about half. So about just over 8% is, 8 million is paid for by the municipalities, while just under 8%, under 8 million paid for by the 9 municipalities, and 8.9 million is paid for through Tumo. So as you can see, EMS is still by far the largest cost center that we have. So it's over half of our net local share. So this is where it is important that we pay attention to what's happening there. Childcare is actually the lowest at just under 700,000. Ontario Works is about 1.3 million. And then the housing is about 6.1 million. And what I'm going to stress about housing too is that 6.1 million is almost entirely what the housing budget is. So putting in a good way, even with the change in government provincially now, we won't be any worse off, because pretty much housing is entirely funded out of municipalities. There's very little provincial federal funding that we get for housing. We've definitely seen a big shift in terms of wait lists. Our wait list is continually growing at a substantial rate, but it's different in communities. For example, in Red Lake, we've seen a significant decrease in affordable housing demand for seniors. So we actually need to start rethinking our housing here in this community, especially seniors housing. Instead of making it entirely open to non-seniors, I think we need to start looking at it, and we are looking and saying, do we make the market rent seniors? So still respecting the community within buildings to make sure that we still keep for what they were initially intended for, but instead of having vacant units, and we know there's a wait list for market rent seniors units, we actually look at redesignating those units as market rent. And as the need changes over time, if we do see an increase in seniors housing, affordable seniors housing, then we can just, as tenants move out or units become vacant, we can just redesignate them, but really shifting with the community demand. And the other part is, and we'll have a conversation this afternoon, is could we bring support services into the senior unit? So if we have seniors who just need a bit of help, who just can't quite live independently, but could still function very well independently with some supports, could we have some of our units do that instead of sitting empty? Really using all of our units to its fullest capacity. And at the time, so at the end of the year for Red Lake, we had about 9 seniors waiting for housing, and that's now I think close to 0 in terms of just the unit turnover. That this is for affordable seniors housing. So you have to financially qualify to be on this, but we do know that for market there's a need for more seniors housing here in Red Lake. And then families and non-elderly. The biggest growth is non-elderly, but the challenge with that is that it's non-elderly, but we have to have supports along with that. It can't just be independent living, and this is where the supportive housing project that I'll talk about in a few minutes that we're proposing in partnership here for Red Lake, I think is going to really address this aspect. Overall, I think a number of you have seen this before, but by the end of 2016, our wait list has more than doubled. It's increased by almost 114%, and that continues to grow. Right now, we have over 1,000 families, households waiting for housing. There's no way that for the little capital funding we do get, we can keep up. Our capital funding, as an example, doesn't quite allow us to build a 4-plex a year. So it's about $500,000 or so a year. And what we need is actually about $16.9 to $21 million a year just to stabilize the wait list. This is one of the things where we do need to push both provincially and federally. Both governments need to be pushed hard because they both have a role to play, and both should be playing a role here. And so with the upcoming AMO conference, certainly I think that's where the message needs to be hammered even more with this new government, saying that you cannot use the same funding allocation yardsticks that you have in the past for Northern Ontario. It just does not work for Northwestern Ontario. We don't have the population base off reserve, but yet the entire region has access to the housing stock. So where we get the tax revenue from in terms of building new housing is very different than it would be in Southern Ontario. Where in Southern Ontario, if you had let's say the region appeal, you have a new subdivision go in, so much of that subdivision, development charge and so forth, get allocated for affordable housing. the demand here isn't new subdivisions. It is actually access to service in Red Lake. So that by that means, the funding model has to respect that fact as well. Otherwise, we'll just continue to see an increase in housing waitlist without really addressing it. Through various partnerships and shifting gears a bit, we spent a significant amount of time looking at why are families on the wait list for affordable housing in the first place. You can't just say, well, they just have a hard time affording housing, because very often families housing isn't the primary reason why they're on the wait list. It is need to be close to medical services. So dialysis patients, as an example, need to be close to healthcare centers. So, and that service doesn't exist in most First Nation communities. So they'll be on the wait list for housing when in fact they can't wait for housing. In fact, they should have something immediately, because their medical condition doesn't wait. It doesn't take time off to say, well, the disease will come back once you find housing. It doesn't. Access to school is another aspect where if you're a youth in many First Nation communities, you need to leave your community to access high school. So your options are Red Lake, Sioux Lookout, Kenora, your Falls, or Dryden. But if the housing isn't there, it creates another layer of difficulty. And so what we're finding is that, as I mentioned, of the over 1,000 households on the wait list, many of them are on there because they need to access other services, and that's why they need housing. And so from that, we're really looking at saying, well, how do we actually have more purpose-built housing? And since we started doing that, we now have in the works, the next 20 months or so, 207 new housing units that will be developed throughout the region. So that's the most significant housing investment that we've seen in decades. A lot of it is purpose-built. It will address our wait list. Our concern is that by doing that, we don't want to send a message to our communities that we've forgotten about our seniors, that we've forgotten about families who really do just need affordable housing. But one way we're still focused on that, but one way to actually address our wait list to it as effectively as we can is to present these other unique situations. And that has allowed us to access some pretty unique funding opportunities. And I'll touch on a few. So really, we need about 113, 144 new housing units every year just to keep up across the region. So state of homelessness. We had a really good, for years, the community of Sioux Lookout tracked data quite well in terms of what does homelessness look like in the community. This is through the Out of the Cold emergency shelter there. And so through that, we were able to do some analysis over a 6-year period, so between 2010 and 2015. And generally, over 500 people in Sioux Lookout experience homelessness every year. So this is unique individuals. And so the information tracking how long the stay was, but also looked at what are some of the situations, like why is there such a large number of people experiencing homelessness in that community? And what we found is that the two predominant reasons, almost half of the time, was judicial or medical. People just were getting lost in the system, or being released out of a system without a proper transition plan. And so massive, millions are spent every year trying to manage this failure through homelessness, through policing, through EMS, when in fact we need to strengthen those systems. And that's what we also looked at in terms of where individuals coming from. Is that will then allow us to actually have partnerships with those communities to say, what kind of plans do we need to have in place? So, for example, during that time, there's 237 individuals from Pikangikum First Nation. We need to have a formal relationship with Pikangikum First Nation to say, how do we ensure that systems actually work together so that families can be connected back to their home community? If not, what other pieces need to have to be put in place? So this idea that homelessness is something that municipalities as a community struggle in isolation, I think that is so far outdated that we can't afford to think that way anymore. In fact, that Treaty 3, Grand Council Treaty 3 and Anishinaabe Nation both need to be at the table when discussing homelessness. It's not a non-First Nation or just a municipal issue. It is a regional issue that requires all people at the table. And so very happy to advise that with Wendigo First Nations Tribal Council, we have entered into a formal MOU in terms of starting the relationship, starting the planning, and at least the information sharing, as well as having beginning dialogue with Anishinaabe Nation on this. So if we're doing a 10-year housing and homelessness plan, it's short-sighted to ignore what's happening in First Nation communities. And we also have, in principle, have an MOU with Kenora Chiefs Advisory. So when we look at providing support services and social assistance, we look at the whole picture, really supporting families where they need to have the service instead of having this jurisdictional ping pong that happens with families now. So we spent between really the month of May doing homeless enumeration across the region. Our understanding is that we were the only service manager that actually did a period prevalence count where we actually spent this much time and energy looking at homelessness in all of our communities. We weren't interested in just looking at Sioux Lookout and Kenora. I mean, we could have, and the ministry would have been fine with that, the Ministry of Housing. But we actually wanted to get a sense of what's going on in all of our communities, because homelessness looks different. It's very different in Red Lake than it is in Sioux Lookout. It's very different in Dryden than it is here as well. And we had incredible support from all service providers, including municipalities as well, whether it be police services, friendship centers, the health unit, hospitals. I mean, they were critical. I'm talking the whole healthcare sector. And it's allowed us to present information or gather information in a way that I think is very unique in Ontario, and that I think most regions don't have this type of working relationship where these are community issues and the community pulls up its sleeves and says, everybody at the table, let's figure this out. In Red Lake, we spent, actually it's just over 2 days here, May 30th and June 1st. What we found during that prevalence count is that formally what we heard back through surveys was 393 individuals were homeless at that time. It's safe to say that this is understated, because those who are in that situation rarely trust systems. And so without trust, people are afraid to come forward. But even to have this kind of a number, to have across the region at any given time, have 339 individuals who are experiencing homelessness is an incredibly high number. Especially given that we're talking a population base just within the communities, of those communities, about 37, maybe a little less, 37,000 people. I can tell you nowhere I think in Canada does this number quite compare, non-First Nation. So from that, our solutions, and I think our ask to ministers can be much more pinpoint, much more forceful as well. In Red Lake, during that time, we found that there's at least 19 people at any given time that are homeless in this community. What's quite surprising is that through this, Dryden has a higher homeless population than Sioux Lookout. That was a big surprise to us. And what is really, when looking at, we also didn't look at just numbers, but also in terms of some of the whys, in terms of age demographics. I mean, it's almost split down the middle in terms of male-female, which is quite unusual. I think homelessness is very often perceived as, well, it's a young male thing. In large urban centers, that's kind of what you see, but for us, 50% male, 42% female, and 2% would be transgender, two-spirited, or we just didn't get an answer. It's important to know when we look at providing services. As an organization, we're no longer just interested in keeping lights on in shelters or saying, here's some funding, just make it work, where we're actually looking at prevention and full wraparound services as part of the shelter system. It has to be more than just a cot on the ground, because what happens is that as morning comes and the day breaks, individuals are back on the streets, then it becomes a policing issue, it becomes an EMS issue, it becomes a hospital issue. Throughout your pot, you pay 100% policing, 50% on EMS, and healthcare. It's the province, justice, it's the province, but by and large, municipalities in the province pay if we don't get this right. And two, quite young as well, the fact that we had almost 70 individuals under the age of 25. And what was interesting in the city of Dryden is that we had the highest high school age or high school student population experiencing homelessness. So as we look at service development, certainly something we have to start paying attention and saying, are we reaching those young people before it's too late? And something that I didn't want to put in writing, but I certainly will tell you, is that when we look at the death rate of being experiencing chronic homelessness in our community is about 1.6 per 1,000. So in other words, for every 1,000 people in a community, there's 1.6 persons every year that die due to the elements because they're chronically homeless. Putting that in context to, say, the GTA, that's almost 10,000 people freezing to death every year. I can guarantee you Mayor Tory would be up and down the Premier one side and the other if that ever happened. You'd have the army called in. But yet, here those things don't even make the local media. So, also a very costly way to manage human lives just by that being an outcome. I know it's a bit all downer, but there's solutions. There's solutions here as well. But also it's about 95% Indigenous. So it's important to know when we look at service and program development that we can't just say, well, here's the program we'll offer. We have to have First Nation partners at the table when it comes to delivering services and programs. Because otherwise, especially what we heard through the early years saying, part of the reason families don't access mainstream programs, childcare or child and family centers, that they just don't feel comfortable because it's not something that they're used to. It's not culturally what they're used to. And so from that, I think we have a role to play in saying, well, how do we make sure that families and individuals feel comfortable accessing services? And part of that is to ensure that we have room at the table for our First Nation partners and Indigenous organizations such as the Friendship Centre, such as Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services. And, the list can go on quite a bit. And here's something we looked at as well in terms of almost everywhere it was either acute medical condition, in terms of almost half of all individuals cited that they had some sort of chronic or acute medical condition. So guarantee you that population has a high rate of access to the ER on an annual basis. Physical disabilities, when we look at service planning, where should a shelter be located, where should supportive housing be located? If physical mobility is an issue, we have to account for that. And about 40% or so cited as having a physical disability. And then addictions and mental health. And I can tell you sometimes all four of them are all present in the same individual, so when we start looking at that. So homeless is very complex and a difficult means to finding solutions to, but it's not impossible, I think, by understanding, saying, if we now look at enhancing supports here at the emergency shelter, it can't just be the shelter, the municipality, and the KDSB doing this. We need to have the hospital as part of addiction and supports. We need to have the Friendship Centre in terms of that cultural piece. So really it's all hands on deck when we look at service planning. So some of the solutions. So this by no means is what's being proposed. This is is finished in Sioux Lookout. So the doors are open. We're looking at now having tenants move in. August 1st is the first set of tenants are moving into the 20-unit supportive housing project. It is a unique project in all of Ontario. It's in partnership with the hospital, with Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, the Ministry of Health, the Friendship Centre, and the municipality as well, in terms of just saying what resources, when we first started talking about this, saying what resources do we have? And we were looking at doing 8 units. And it was only through partnering with Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services saying that if you can promise the rents, we can up that to 20 units. Bonus. One, we don't need to necessarily own the infrastructure, we just need to make sure that the operating, so the revenue is there, which is something that we could easily do. And so as a result, it's 20 units with 24/7 support services on site. And it's not your traditional 1-to-8 ratio, meaning that you have Monday to Friday, one person for 8 staff. This is around the clock, knowing that homelessness, disease, illnesses don't take a break on weekends. So they don't clock out 5 o'clock and say, I'll see you in the morning. That's usually when you need the most, is on the weekends. So, and what's neat about this too is that I think it's the only situation where DSAB is actually funding a hospital directly to deliver services. But it's going to work. And so that's now opening. And so we're looking at doing something very similar here in Red Lake in partnership with Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, where, through working with you, they have acquired the lands. We have the means of guaranteeing the rent, meaning that they can actually go and finance a lot of the capital, and they're guaranteed the rent for it, the revenue for it. So it works for everyone. And the 19 individuals that I mentioned that are reported to be homeless here, it's a great way to move them off the street with full supports, and where the shelter really is just that, a shelter where people, if something happened, they just need a short-term stay. It shouldn't be a long-term stay situation. So that's quite exciting, and so I think it's moving along quite fast. There's still some community consultation. I'm not sure if there's zoning, but this we're actually quite excited. We had slant this for about 2 years out, but now we have a situation to move much faster on it, and so we're quite excited to see this.
Sorry, Amy, so how long did it, from start to finish, how long did it take to get to this upcoming August 1st opening?
We started, so part of what helped was so really, I'll break it down. One was convincing the Ministry of Health to say that this was a need. And we actually started in the spring of 2017. Actually, it was the late fall of 2016, where between myself and the then Executive Director of Ontario Regional Housing Services, Don McBain, I said, how do we figure this out? Because one, we don't have health at the table, we can't get them to the table, but we're paying it forward here, and this is the impact it's having on homelessness and so forth. That's when it really got kick-started. So we both went back and said, here's the data, the business case. And what we found in Sioux Lookout, we didn't stalk individuals, but certainly when we look at where individuals hit service points, we found that on an annual basis, you had 8 individuals using about $1 million in service a year between policing, EMS, hospital, and shelter, not even including the justice system. So, the business case wrote itself. And so once we presented that to the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Health, and then the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation got involved, it just flew. So construction started in October of last year, so October 2017, and it's done now. So not too bad, 7 months construction. Like by the time the first shovel hit the ground I can tell you that they knew what they were doing. There was definitely some unforeseen things. We have a notebook that's pretty thick of lessons learned in terms of purpose-built homes, so this one should go much smoother.
So we're assuming that it'll be a similar timeline with the Red Lakes project, and as you mentioned, there are a few things that are still, zoning is one, community consultation is another, but we are moving forward. That access road, we'll be doing that in the next upcoming weeks.
Fantastic.
So so we've got a good partnership now, including KDSB, Ontario Regional Housing.
Yeah. And I would say definitely we should not underestimate the power of community consultation. Whatever resources and energy we spend now, it'll pay dividends down the road. When we did this in Sioux Lookout, part of why Sioux Lookout was picked as well is the community just rolled out the red carpet. The council really did. We had difficulty accessing lands, and they sold off one of their surplus lands that was actually part of a future expansion plan that they had. They said, no, this is it. They did the rezoning, and then it was all hands on it in terms of the community consultation. And part of what a strategy we use is, it's very difficult to go through a rezoning process like this and expect the members of the public to just stand up and say what their feelings are. Nobody's going to want to go on a public record to say how they feel. So to give households the opportunity privately to express exactly how they feel is very often just not understanding fear of the unknown. That's actually kind of driving some of the concerns. And so giving every household the opportunity to privately express the concerns, and then that opportunity for having us and the community opportunity to say, this is actually what it's going to look like, here's what the plan is, it just puts everybody at ease. And through this, there was no objections to the zoning. We did a similar project, that's the Dryden Indigenous Homeward Bound program, very similar. Did the same neighborhood approach. In 2012, it turned into a huge race issue for the community. So we were concerned about that as well, but using this, not a single opposition during the rezoning process. In Kenora, the second time around for the rezoning, same process. We said, no, it's a team approach. It's representation from ourselves, from the partners. So every partner has a staff on this working group, including the municipality or the city, and it's so that way you would know what the concerns are. Like if your staff is part of it, you know exactly what the concerns are, and we just make it part of the program. The program has to fit the community, not the community around the program. And then two, the opportunity for us to partner in this is bit time sensitive too, so the time frame works out really well for us. And the other one is, so we just submitted an application on the co-investment fund for the transitional housing project with New Starts here. So that on Friday that was submitted. We're actually quite excited about this one as well. Going back to, if we can support families right from the onset, they shouldn't need affordable housing down the road. So if we do everything we can to, in this particular case, having lone parent households get on their own 2 feet, they shouldn't have to live in affordable housing. And that's in part what we're finding too, is that we do a good job of keeping families in poverty. When I say we, it's the Royal Regis system, saying, well, your rent's going to be based on income. If you earn more, you pay more rent. The system is fighting families trying to get out of poverty. And so what we actually have in some situations, and even here in Red Lake, is that we have multiple generations living in the affordable housing unit. Affordable housing was never designed to do that. It was supposed to be a transition. It was supposed to be affordable transition. So families got on their feet, and then were able to buy homes, and afford their own situation. That's not what it's become in our region. And so from that, what are we doing to equip families to actually be able to get on their own 2 feet? Well, and that is, if they're accessing the women's shelter, they need time to transition. So if there's training needs to happen and so forth. So part of that is having transitional housing. And that's in part what the Dryden Homeward Bound project is that it's housing and supports on their terms with a very rigorous structure to it, where at the end of it, that mom isn't set up for a minimum wage job. And part of what we are projecting, so this is based just on stats and also in partnership with the Ministry of Housing, some projections. The fastest growing household demographics are lone parents in this region. So between 2011 and 2020, our number of lone parent households will increase by 45%. So it's by far the fastest growing households. So our approach to how we support households has to change. And what's interesting, we look at the number of children, so 1, 2, 3, or no children. Actually, 3 or more children is about 59% growth in that. And most times it's mom with 3 or more children. And then the situation with that is that under a lot of the current rules is, well, if it's mom with 3 children, she needs to have, depending on the age of the children, she may need to have a 2 or 3 bedroom, or sometimes a 4 bedroom. Well, if a 2 bedroom does the family just fine, shouldn't mom have the choice? But that's what's going to work for them, instead of waiting for a 4 bedroom to come up, which are almost impossible to get in our region.
I've got a question for you. Since you showed that chart, we went down to Kenora Kenora conference in Ear Falls, and there was a presentation from New Starts from women from Red Lake, and they have their unit like for people to stay like overnight or short term. Mm-hmm. They also told us at that conference about the land that they have available that's attached right to their other lot that they got. And they had sort of like, it sounded like almost shovel ready. It was just they were lacking funding.
That's exactly what this is going to do.
So
right in that situation.
Okay, so they can apply for that, or they have applied for that, and they can eventually maybe get approved to go ahead and start their building, because that's what they were interested in, was a building.
That's right. So that's exactly, so it's this is in true partnership with New Starts and the KDSV. And then the municipality will be included as well as part of some of the supports to make this happen.
So this one could be a Red Lake unit that they were talking about down in Ear Falls.
Yeah, this is taking exactly that presentation and putting bricks and mortar to that.
Okay, because that's where they were sort of, when I walked out of there after listening to her presentation to all of us, it sort of sounded like, well, how much more do you have to do? You've got the land, which I went and viewed after our meeting, and it's all there. Like there's no question about it being all there. It's just the funding, and get approval for funding to build the actual units on that property. So that could be a go-ahead then fairly soon.
We're hoping so. So we submitted the application to the federal program. And I can tell you that in terms of, there are other options as well. So this is certainly, we're the most hopeful in terms of having funding. If that doesn't happen, we just rejig the model a little bit, the business model, in terms of do we look at, so now with the National Housing Bank starting up as well, so the KDSB about 3.5 years ago was part of a number of housing service managers that actually said, if we're having difficulty getting financing to build this at affordable interest rates, why don't we just make our own bank? So we got Alberta Housing and BC Housing on board as well, and we now, it's a go-ahead. So now it's a $200 million bank that, as a backup for this, we would just simply shift gears and do that. I can tell you, the systems have enough revenue. So that's the other part too, is that what's often the barrier is to capital, where someone doesn't have the infrastructure funding to make the mix of bricks and mortar happen, but you have the rent subs, you have the operating dollars already in the system. So it's just a matter of aligning them, saying, well, if we can actually have at a very affordable interest rate and have it locked in for 20, 30 years, we can now finance a build like this. And then the revenue piece can be secured. And instead of just sitting and waiting, saying, well, we'll do something once we get provincial federal funding. I think those days are in the past. I think if we want to start taking charge of our own communities, we just look at how do we make things happen. And part of it is, I think, a mixture of borrowing money to make it happen, as long as the revenue is guaranteed.
15 minutes every few weeks.
Okay, absolutely. Part of the reason we want to get into why we're getting to other housing called businesses as well, is that we're finding that we're spending a fortune managing situations. And I'll share the Kenora experience. At any given time, so we looked at, so this is from an Ontario Works perspective, so between 2012 and 2015, over 4 years, we looked at 385 cases, different individuals who were assigned to one location as a multi-res building. And we looked at what was their outcome. So they came onto social assistance, so they were part of an employment program. And we found that all of them actually were in Kenora because of justice. They were remanded from the far north and then released on condition and then stayed at this location. Of the 385 individuals, over 80% of them reoffended, sometimes within days, sometimes within hours. So you have the cost of transporting individuals, remanding them out of the far north, sometimes to the tune of about $10,000 a person. Then you have the cost of Ontario Works, just as an example. And so we're actually finding that this was costing us between $440,000 a year, just to KDSB, setting people up to fail. And we also looked at in terms of all those cases, so we looked at, this is what I'm going to, this is 2016, so again, we looked at 149 individuals. A third were between 2 days. When I say 2 days, that's about as detailed as we can get with our system. I mean, if somebody's on assistance on Friday, by the time Monday it's 2 days, but usually it's, for some reason, there's a big uptick on Fridays, and I think it's because courts just want to get individuals out the door before the weekend so they're not incarcerated over the weekend. Maybe I should be careful. I guess this is public, so I'll be very careful. I mean, there's some coincidence there. But yeah, I mean, to be on social assistance, you shouldn't be on it for 30 days or less. It's usually about 6 months generally for a typical case. And even that is a pretty aggressive time. So as you can see, very few are actually on for that long. So it really means it's just, as one of the police officers put it, it's a charge factory. Spending millions, literally millions in this situation for really no good outcomes whatsoever. So we took one step further and said, let's just be sure. And I think this will be the situation here in Red Lake as well, by working with OPP here. In partnership with OPP in Kenora, we looked at 3,060 bail violation cases, in other words, breaches, and found that over 70% of the time it could have been avoided had they had supports. In other words, a big chunk abstaining, alcohol or drugs. There's probably a reason why somebody got arrested in the first place. So then just to say, don't drink, and then here's some money, go find an apartment. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what might happen. And so to have that kind of a ratio, where 70% of individuals where we could have prevented a bail violation from happening in the first place, you gotta remember, this is 100% municipal cost, policing. So the city of Kenora paid for every single one of those cases. as a call. And under the new police bill model, you have the same situation here. So the Attorney General was blown away. They had never seen this type of analysis before. And so as a result, in Kenora now, we are developing a formal bail, like a supportive housing bail bed program. Not only will this save money to the municipalities, but also we're actually going to set people up to success. And so it's in partnership, a true tri-partnership between Kenora Chiefs Advisory. So actually having First Nation communities at the table to talk about how to proper plan for programs, and the Nietzsche Friendship Center. So the KDSB is going to be, we acquired an existing building for $1, and we didn't get a deal, just to be clear, but we're going to be building a brand new building, a brand new facility, and then once that facility is done next year, helicopter the program over, so the supportive housing and the bail support piece over to the new facility, and then we have a piece of land that can then be converted to something else. But really, so the KDSB landlord, property manager, Kenora Chiefs Advisory in terms of the support housing piece, and then Nietzsche in terms of the bail piece. So really bring it all together. So now we have a formal structure, but also to hold systems accountable, holding the justice system accountable to what is happening. Another one is pre- and postnatal housing. So we're looking at doing 30 units in Sioux Lookout, solely designed for families who are in Sioux Lookout for pre- and postnatal needs. And so this graph as an example. So the Sioux Lookout Hostel, operated by the Sioux Lookout First Nation Health Authority, is designed really to, it's 100 beds. So if every bed had one person in every single day, I mean, at the most, you should have about 36,000, or close to 37,000 nightly stays. And that's about where they're at. In 2017, they had another almost 29,000 nightly stays in hotels. So we have families who are in Sioux Lookout for medical services, in Ignace in hotels, in Dryden in hotels, and every day they're transported back and forth. And so the average length of stay for an expecting mom or even post-delivery is 4 to 6 weeks. So can you imagine very often you can't even travel with your family to go through this experience because of, one, there's no housing. So as a mom, you're going to go through giving birth alone, and you're going to be away from home for that length of time, and you're going to live in a hotel. I mean, it just, and what we're seeing, we strongly believe there's a direct correlation with improperly supporting moms and dads from the get-go to what we're seeing from a poverty aspect. And so the idea is that this housing, it'd be like a Ronald McDonald style housing, specifically and purposely built to support expecting families. And so in this case, the whole family can come together to go through that journey. And if there's supports that are needed, they'll be provided in terms of childcare, in terms of withdrawal or addictions. We have many single moms who, her first thought should be, does my child go into care, into foster care? Well, maybe if mom had some supports from the get-go, we can keep the family together. So it's quite a radical new way of doing housing, but we're quite excited. This is what happened when we have very targeted and purpose-built lobbying in terms of saying, here's some very unique situations. And two, again, this is in partnership with OHAS, where they're going to build it, we're going to lease the whole building from them for about 15 years, and then ourselves and SLIF now do the programming, the intake, and so forth. And we're looking at student family housing, so for families from the far north whose students are accessing high school. So instead of the student going through that journey by themselves, I'm probably cutting close to time here, but just as an example, First Nation students now from the far north, generally those who are brave enough to go through the journey, about a third actually graduate. So that's a lot of agony and resource that are going on the 2/3, in a sense called failure. And maybe it's too harsh of a term to use. But it's interesting when we look at, of the 1/3 that actually graduate, students who are actually supported, where the family comes with them or there's that direct support, almost all of them graduate. And if they're doing it alone, it's almost always failure. So where they aren't completing that process. And so through this, in partnership with Winnebago First Nations Council, we're looking at doing purpose-built housing strictly for families whose students need to access high school. What this allows us to do is actually do this across the entire region, because smaller communities are safer. families feel more comfortable in smaller communities like a Red Lake, like at Deer Falls. And so I think it's going to open up a whole new door in terms of how communities support communities. Last part, so just on childcare expansion. Last fall, we were incredibly happy to learn that our Journey Together proposal, we had proposed 150 new full-day childcare spaces along with 3 early on centers was approved. And this includes programming and capital. And we had 50 new spaces for Red Lake, so operated through the Red Lake Indian Friendship Center. Hard to see, sorry for the coloring. But for Red Lake, and it's starting now, is that we had about $350,000 in capital to do work right at the Friendship Center, and then ongoing about $315,000 to $344,000 in annual operating. And we were quite excited about this project, in that we believe that it's certainly going to complement the existing program here in the community. It's going to allow us to actually bring, and this is sometimes a difficulty, and Mark and I had this conversation where in part we're talking about, when we're having discussions about system planning and so forth, and at the same time we have to switch the table or switch hats, and now I'm talking to Mark as an operator. It's a bit of an awkward role sometimes, but we really believe that this way too, it opens up the discussion at a provincial level in terms of what supports are needed for mainstream operators. And we've made a lot of headway, but my concern is that we can't afford to now just sit back and say, well, we've made some progress, now we can sit back, is that we actually need to be moving forward even more so, in particular when it comes to operating. And part of what we're funded for operating here is that we're going back to the problem saying, if through the Journey Together this funding per space, wouldn't it be fair, or reasonably assume that it costs the same to operate a space in mainstream in Red Lake as it does at Journey Together? So where at least that funding is on par. And what that allow us to do too is then at least existing operators to ensure, mainstream operators to ensure that they have the support and the operations funding as well to continue on. So that municipalities who are directly operating aren't doing it at a loss. I mean, our goal really is here to make every municipal operator whole or break even. That's not to say that municipalities can't incur like if they want to do service enhancement, that's entirely your call. Like absolutely, we would support that. If there's changes in hours and so forth, and it's going to cost more, you know what? Why not? I mean, you know your community best, but at the same time, I think kind of that minimum standard, at least that should be. You should be supported the same way as any other operator across Ontario. And I can tell you we're not right now. That the way we're funded as if our entire region is a Sault Ste. Marie, like the city of Sault Ste. Marie, which makes no sense to us. So the argument that our board's making is that we should be funded on the same per space basis as Rainy River is, as parts of Thunder Bay are. So I think we're making progress, but it's been an interesting battle to have, and certainly appreciate working with Mark on moving this file forward.
And we appreciate the efforts to date, especially the commitment to get us whole. I mean, we've had many discussions, myself and the other 3 operators from the KDSB. So we appreciate the assistance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And part of we've changed not our approach, but certainly our engagement much more than we historically have. In fact, we've set up an early years team. So it used to be just our director of integrated social services would be responsible for communicating with all the child care providers, when in fact they need much more than that in terms of staying on top of the licensing, helping with the business, like the business cases. And it's difficult to make system changes when you're learning after it's too late, so after a loss has been incurred. So really having staff that can directly work with your staff to say, what are the challenges coming up? And then so you have that resource so that when your child care manager makes a call and says, I have a question with this, or this is, I just want to find out more, they can just pick up the phone or send an email to dedicated staff in our organization who then work with the operators. And so that started this past January. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think that's well past my 15 minutes.
No, you've got about 30 seconds left.
Just the risk on
questions.
the childcare, it's staffing. There's a lot of turnover, and that's something that really needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
I think there's more likely burnout is happening quite a bit, but just it's a constant revolving door with staff, and it's really poses a big challenge for our supervisor. So that's just something that should be on the radar. And there was talk of expansion to other communities like Nestor Falls, Sioux Narrows. How is that happening, and who's the operator in those cases?
Excellent question. So part of what our board also looked at saying, is it right for families living in, say, Pickle Lake or Ignace or Sioux Narrows, Nestor Falls, as an example, that don't have access to childcare, when in fact municipalities pay into provide funding to the KDSB. So should geography be a reason that they are excluded from accessing affordable childcare? And what are the barriers? And what we found is that, Ignace might be too small to have a standalone operator. So what if we pooled our 4 small municipalities, like small communities, where we had a one operator? And so what we're doing, we're moving forward with actually establishing this is just very early naming, it'll be properly renamed or properly named, just an earliest childcare consortium, where we're looking at setting up a nonprofit at this point in time. It'll be an arm's length nonprofit of the KDSB, just so that we can get everything up and running. But where it'd be one operator for 4 communities through that, and you start doing that, all of a sudden the numbers work. You can share staffing resources. You can certainly share in the admin piece, and that might be a model that may actually prove to be useful across the region. So it's a start, but certainly at this point, that might be. It'll afford us to have different conversations with you as well. And but staffing, absolutely. I mean, great to see the expansion fund. Where are the people going to come from, right? You still need to have ECEs, and it's not like we have ECEs just kind of kicking around like surplus. So what are we doing in terms of ensuring that we're attracting staff here? So part of that is we're engaging with Confederation College more directly, saying, can't we do placements where as part of their curriculum they actually do work with our operators, and we find a way to support that. The other part too is ensuring that the ECEs earn a comparable salary to, say, the school system. And so part of the AMO delegation, or one of the delegations submitted to the Minister of Education, saying it's fine if you're paying your EC equivalents in the school boards this rate. It's all provincial funding, but yet you're not setting up the stage where we can do that, where we can actually fund our operators equally, where they can offer the same wage rate. So what happens is they start off with our operators and then jump over to the school board, as an example. And so it should be the same at minimum. And there should be, if the province is going to fund 100% here, it's probably not unreasonable to say that we should do it 100% here. And so from that, we'll see how that's going to go over. But certainly at AMO, that's one of the issues that we're bringing up. I want to mention one other part, and this is where we've done this through NOSDA, so it's Northern Ontario Service Deliverers Association. So it's 11 of us, and 10 DSEBs in the greater city of Sudbury. But as CAOs, we get together on at least a quarterly basis, 4 times a year. We get together, and usually in Toronto. And what we do is we make a day out of it or 2 days of it. And last year, as an example, we had 2 times where we actually met right at the legislature. Well, one time right at the legislature, and we actually had a day and a half of direct minister and deputy minister meetings. So instead of the speed dating that occurs at AMO, we actually had an hour, in some cases, directly with the minister or senior level staff. And I think that's something that certainly this region has some attention at Queen's Park, and I would certainly encourage that, something we should explore with the CAOs in this region, that at minimum to say, why couldn't we do the same thing? I mean, yes, it's a bit costly to head down to Toronto, but I'd say it's money much better. Well, not better, but certainly you can get a lot out of it in terms of having 15 minutes to having actually an hour with a minister or deputy minister directly. Then you can get into the weeds in terms of what are the issues that are facing here. And we found it quite effective, and actually we're quite surprised at how, by actually having the meetings there, a minister can step out and say, yeah, I do have an hour, so let's do this, and we were able to kind of get together and talk about other similar business, but at least, I mean, it worked. Mind you, we're coming up to an election as well, so I mean, that certainly was an incentive to provide more funding, but it was actually quite effective, we thought.
And I like that, you and I were on a plane coming back from a Maine, and I believe, and Henry was speaking of the importance of sitting at the table, going to Toronto, and our CAO group, which is made up of 7 of us, 6 of us in Sulaco is still waiting to name a CAO. But we've met in Toronto, or I shouldn't say Toronto, we've met in Thunder Bay with some ministry folks with MPAC. We've done it at the AMO in Ottawa one time. So but there's huge value in doing that.
I can tell you that other cities do it, and they're right around the GTA area, so I mean, they usually FaceTime gets the results. So.
Would it be possible, Henry, for you to leave a copy of that presentation?
Already done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can get a copy.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank Henry for showing up today. It's some pretty sobering and some pretty, definitely food for thought there. And it's not going to change any in the future. That's for sure. If anything, we may be looking at different numbers that aren't trending the right way. It's going to take years to change all this.
Yeah.
It's a problem. It's not just Red Lake. It's all of northwestern Ontario and probably a part of northeastern Ontario as well. But maybe not as much. Northeastern does have a few things different than what we do in northwestern because of the distances and the population. But I'd like to thank Ernie for the job he does with the KDSB and the time he puts into it. I'm pretty sure it's not just a 5/8 type job. A lot of the times, and there's time away from family and vacations that may not be the vacations you want to take, so thank you for that dedication, Henry. And maybe we'll do this again I was going to say this fall, but it won't be long till this fall.
I mean, anytime. Certainly, I think we've made some changes in terms of how we communicate, just in terms of after board meetings, so that you get information as well as a municipality. Here's what the KDSB is up to. Demonstrating value for money. I think that's something that we need to be held accountable to, because your levy to us is significant. It's a significant portion of your tax revenue. And so from that, demonstrate what are we doing with it, but at the same time, to ensure that, I keep going back, that we have the right taxpayer paying for services. And that doesn't mean that we can't do it. You can't do it, but we just need to make sure that the right sources are providing that. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you.
Just one last thing. I know you're going to AMO and there's a delegation request, but if you need community representation, I'd be happy to sit in on any delegations.
And certainly in terms of, even in terms of, as we, I mean, one will find out if ministers are even going to AMO this time around. I mean, that's still up in the air, but I would say in terms of any delegation we get approved, certainly let you know. And then even if they're sharing briefing notes, I mean, there's one meeting. I think it was the Minister of Energy, and it was kind of comical. At I think it was AMO 2 years ago. It was Ignace went in, Sulka had just been in, Kenora had been in. And so by the time we came, we were like number 5. And the minister was like, what in the world's going on in the Kenora district? So it's just back to back to back, and our messages were all similar. So it helps. Even if it's not in the same meeting, at least our information is the same.
It does. There's big value in that, because it was interesting because it was on daycare, Ministry of Education, and Dryden just came out of their meeting, and we were just going in. So we had like 30 seconds just to say, what did you just say? But we agreed that moving forward, that we'll share information. So, because we had the same issues. And so, we'll just, that commitment to share moving forward. So we're delivering strong, collaborative message.
mind in a break, or can we carry on with
Can we
talking?
ask them a question? I mean, there's a note that has said questions, but then all of a sudden the talk has gone over. I would like to ask one question that I'm not clear of, and he can answer it, I'm sure, because we've talked about it around this table umpteen times about daycare and Board of Education. Because we're kind of very fortunate. We have our daycares all inside of schools. So, and we thought maybe someday our taxpayers shouldn't have to be paying for daycare services, that should be put out to the Board of Education, or someone else should pick up all the costs instead of our taxpayers. So, and I know we've all talked about it, you've taken it down to different places on your travels. I just wonder, where is that sort of going? I'm very happy with Red Lake Indian Friendship Center getting their enhancement. I've been following that for months now too, so I knew this was coming, so that is a great thing. But we still have our problems of three, the daycare is sitting in St. John's and Golden Learning Center and Red Lake, and they're all in schools, they're all in a perfect placement because you want to get the kids ready to start into school, to real school, younger nowadays. So do you ever see a transition that we as a municipality can get out of funding daycare and the Board of Education maybe would take it on? It sounds like a perfect match in my mind, but maybe my mind's not going the right way. So I just sort of wondered, I know you've been approached about that because I know Sandy has probably talked about it around the table because we've driven him crazy about daycare, and us paying so much for our tax base is based on daycare. So I'm just wondering, has anything sort of happened with your communications with?
That's a huge question.
Well, I'm sorry, but
no, that's fine. I'll do the best I can, reading tea leaves and also just sharing some thoughts on that. One, in terms of, I think there are a number of issues or that at least I think lead up to asking the question. One is in regards to if childcare is adequately funded. I think that's part of the issue is that our municipal operators feel they shouldn't be subsidizing it. But it's in part of having lost track of what the funding model has done in Northwestern Ontario. That's part of the reason for that. And that's something we're looking at addressing, working with every operator, saying, we need to get you to break even. And I would say for the most part, we're there. Then so if that's the case, then is that still in terms of where does it make sense to be? And I think this has to come back to what makes sense for families. I mean, one part with even you being an operator is that you have direct access to know what's going on with families in your community directly, in terms of what struggles are mom and dad facing, what are some of the barriers, what are the needs of children in this community. You lose some of that as soon as if you hand it over in part. But then also, what are mom and dad comfortable with? And I can tell you, in Red Lake, as an example, what we heard through the early years surveys that I think having everything in schools may also be a mistake, and that you'll have families not accessing it because school represents something very different to them. And their experience in school was not very good, their experience. And so from that translates into, will they be part of that? I certainly think that for school boards and the KDSB and municipalities not to work together to support families is a big mistake. I think that has to be how we support families. We are all in this. We actually have to have a network in terms of holistic service supports. Even children going through, like say, transitioning out of childcare formally into school, if there's food insecurities at home, that child will suffer in school. And so by us working with the school and saying, how do we support families in terms so that food insecurity isn't an issue, affording homes isn't an issue. Those all go part and parcel in setting up students for success, so they're actually successful in schools. And then it's a matter of, in terms of who's better. Because childcare really, even though the system legally is all about the child, I would argue that childcare is much more so about supporting mom and dad, in terms of, at least that's where it could be. And I think from that, the school system and childcare system are very different in its approach from that regards, in terms of for whom can it support. And so I think there's merits in both at the same time. Right from early on, if mom and dad aren't supportive, I think that child's going to suffer. So it's a big question in terms of where it would eventually go. I don't know. I don't know where this new government may may view that. I think there's going to be some, I mean, overall, if Red Lake wasn't, are we break even at this point in time?
We are at this point.
Okay. So if we can keep that, really, I mean, the cost that Red Lake is providing towards childcare is very minimal. So then it's a matter of what's best for the family. And so I think from that, that's the real important thing. We need to make sure that families in the community feel comfortable, are well supported.
Interesting.
And being within school is different. So I think it's a complex question, for sure.
Thank you for your attempt to answer it.
You're welcome.
It'll still be my question, I'm sure, next year.
Nothing else? Oh, Greg's not here. Let's just look at that being said, once again, I thank you, Henry. And next on our agenda, Claudine, with our 2017 financial statements.
Thank you very much.
See you
Nice to see
roughly
you.
around.
Likewise.
I'm going to say roughly around two now, I think.
Yep. Whereabouts is it?
We'll do it next door, yeah.
Beautiful. We'll see you then.
See.
Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, that was very interesting. I'm glad I sat through that. Okay, so your financial statements are 24 pages. I'm not going to go through every page, but I'll just highlight what I think is important to go through. And I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'd like to start on page 5, which is the consolidated statement of operations, which highlights your revenues and expenses for the year. And if we start at the top, our revenues in total were $18,485,000. Your budget was $17.5 million. Taxation, the first line was $9,139,000, significantly higher than what you had budgeted, and that was because of the additional subs that were levied in 17. Fees and user charges were $4.7 million on a budget of $4.9. Canada grants were $645,000. Budget was $521. Ontario grants were $2.8 million. Budget was $3 million. And other income was $1,156,000 on a budget of $471. The big difference there was that there was the hail damage in 2017, and there was insurance proceeds on. So most of that difference, that it was over $500,000, is sitting in other income. The total revenues, $18.4 million. In terms of expenses totaled $17.7 million on a budget of $17.1. General government was $2,065,000 on a budget of $1.8. Over budget here, mostly because of the allowance set up on taxation. Property taxes are behind, and that big difference is basically that amount. Protection services was within budget at $2.2 million versus a budget of $2.2. Transportation services, $3,997,000 on a budget of $4 million. Environmental services, over budget here a little bit. Actual was 3.7, budget was 3.4. Basically two things here caused the variance for the most part. One was the recycling and waste disposal going to Ear Falls. That wasn't fully budgeted for in 17. And then you had budgeted for the landfill expansion of about $80,000 or $100,000, but that actually as a capital item, but that's not capital. It's considered an expense, so it's showing here as an expense. So that's partly why that's a big difference here. Health services was in line at $745,000. Social and family services, $2.6 million versus a budget of $2.6. Recreation and cultural services, over budget here a little bit. At actual expenses came in at $2 million on a budget of $1.7. There were basically, and this is consistent from one year to the next, really, is that the museum and library are consolidated in the financial statements of the municipality, and they have their own expenditures, that they have their own revenues and expenses that get added here that are not on budget. So that was about, I think in total, about $200,000 over for that. And then also there was the some amortization and mortgage interest wasn't budgeted for on the arena capital expenditures from the year before. So that was the big difference there. And then planning and development, $300,000 versus a budget of $400,000. So again, expenses 17.7. And if you take your revenues of $18,485,000 less your expenses, you're left with an annual surplus of $697,000. You budgeted $361,000 as a budget, and the previous year it was a shortfall of $747,000. So that's positive, certainly, that you've got a surplus for the year. Accumulated surplus at the beginning of the year was $42.2 million, leaving you with an accumulated surplus of $42.9 million, which we'll look at the breakdown of that in a minute. Any questions on the statement of operations? We flip back flip back a page on page 4. Is the consolidated statement of financial position, which highlights assets and liabilities and your accumulated surplus. So if we look under financial assets at the end of the year, cash and bank was $4,596,000. 3.9 of that is sort of restricted for your reserves. Okay. Investments were $1,424,000. The most significant thing there is the one funds that you've got on hand invested in. Taxes receivable up significantly, and most of that is the additional subs in 17. That was $1,971,000. Trade and other receivables were $3,254,000. So total financial assets were $11,246,000. That was up about $2 million from the previous year. Financial liabilities, so stuff that was owing at the end of December. Bank indebtedness was actually down $2 million from the previous year. It was at end of year was $1,866,000. Accounts payable was $1,486,000. Deferred revenues $506,000. Most of that is the gas tax money that is sitting there that'll be utilized in the future. Your landfill closure and post-closure liability is coming down as you've closed the landfill site, that the expenses related to that were applied to the liability. So we'll see, unless I'm not sure the expansion will do much here, but we'll see that number go down as you continue to monitor the landfill. Long-term liabilities, you had a question on this, Carol, the previous year was, I think it says 17 million, does it? 17.3 million. End of year was 19.5 million. Some of the, 2 million of the bank indebtedness was there were loan proceeds on that, as well as, total loan proceeds for the year about 4 million, and you paid down about 2 million. So that's where you get the 19.5. Total financial liabilities, $24,185,000. And if you take your financial assets less your financial liabilities, you're left with what's called net debt, and that was 12.9 million. The previous year was 14.9. So in terms of financial net debt, you've got an improvement of $2 million. So that's good. Non-financial assets, prepaids were 199,000, and then tangible capital assets were 55,679,000. There were additions of about 1.8 million during the year, and amortization was about 2.8 million. And then if you take your net debt and your non-financial assets, you're left with the accumulated surplus of 42,939,000. And of course, that's not cash, right? That accumulated surplus is invested mostly, well, a lot of that is invested in your infrastructure. So that's the consolidated statement of financial position. Just go through on page 6, just highlight some things here. It's just called the consolidated statement of changes in net debt. It just looks how your net debt changed. And the most important thing here to note really is starts off with your accumulated surplus, and then it subtracts the additions to capital assets of 1.7. You did budget 3.3 million for capital additions, but only 1.8. So there was work that wasn't, capital work that wasn't completed. And then on amortization, actual amortization came in at 2.8 million, and actual budgeted was 2.6. So that's partly why on some of the expense variances that your amortization was higher than what you had budgeted. Okay. And there at the bottom of that page is the net debt again of 12,939,000. On page 7 is just the statement of cash flows. Shows how your cash is affected. So in terms of operating transactions, if you look at the subtotal, through operations, cash generated was 1,735,000. In terms of financing transactions, there were proceeds on long-term debt of 4.2 million, long-term debt repaid of 2 million, and then bank indebtedness was reduced by 2 million for a net of 107 in terms of financing. And investing, your investments increased by 33,000, and then in capital transactions, capital asset additions were 1.7 million, and you did sell one piece of property for 150,000 last year. So your net change in cash was 162,000 positive, and end of year was almost 4.6 million. On page 8, 9, 10, 11 are the accounting policies of the municipality. There were no changes to the significant accounting policies, so I don't think we'll go through that. That just sets out how, what policies you're following in terms of preparing your financial statements. And most of it is municipal based. It's all the same. It's under public sector standards. On page 12 on page 12 is just notes on cash, your investments, and bank indebtedness, which I think is self-explanatory. On page 13 are notes on deferred revenue and the landfill closure, which I think, again, is self-explanatory. On page 14 and 15 is the description of the long-term debt, of all the long-term debts that you've got. It's quite a list. But what's important here on page 15 of the 19.5 million of municipal debt, you can see the principal payments that are expected from year to year. And in 2018, your expected debt repayment would be 2.2 million. In 19, it's 2.3 million. 2020, it's 2 million, and it goes on. Okay, that's just for interest's sake. Then on page 16 is just showing the breakdown of your tangible capital assets by land, buildings, machinery, equipment, vehicles, roads, bridges, water and sewer and land improvements and leaseholds. And so here you can see that in total, all costs of if you ignore amortization, cost of your infrastructure and everything is like $100 million. Amortization to date is $45 million, leaving you at a net book value of $55,679,000. It's big numbers. Then on page 17 is just the comparative information. Note 18, or page 18, note 8 is just on the budget that was approved, bylaw 25, 2017 by council, and it just reconciles from the budget to the financial statements in terms of what you started off with, a zero budget surplus, and then it add backs the capital and amortization, etc. Page 19 is just a note on government transfers, which I think is self-explanatory. And then on page 20, this is basically what I wanted to highlight, was the breakdown of accumulated surplus. So here you've got your reserves set aside for specific purposes. The $3.9 million is set aside in cash. And the most important number really is if you look at the current numbers. Municipality of Red Lake, $1.5 million, Red Lake Library Board, $117, and then the Heritage Center, $25, for a total of $1.7 million. And then you've got your monies in reserves, and then you've got what's invested in capital, which is already spent. And I think that, and then page 20, 21, 23, and the last page is just basically more information, which I don't really think I need to go through unless there's some questions on that. But the last page is just shows the segments by more detail in terms of revenues and expenditures. The font is really small. I don't think we need to go through it, but it's the same numbers, just it consolidates the stuff that we looked at, the first page. And the only other thing is on page 3 is the auditor's report. And basically, so this is my report to council. It's basically saying that, we've audited the financial statements of the municipality. Management is responsible for your financial statements. Our job, or my job as an auditor, is to express an opinion on the statements based on our audit work. And if you look at the last paragraph, it basically just says, in our opinion, or my opinion, that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the municipality for the year ended December 2017. So it's a clean audit opinion. And then there is the, on page 2 is, where management will take responsibility for the financial statements, and that'll be signed by Mark once the statements are approved. And these statements are in draft until they are approved. So that's my quick summary of the financial statements. Does anyone have any questions for me? It's a lot of numbers, but
I'm going to take that as a no.
no. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bud.
And I just would like to say too, with the, we certainly missed Brian in finalizing the work, and just want to, thank certainly Rhonda for her help. So if you can give that information to her, certainly, yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
by Councilor Goodwillie, seconded by Councilor Barron. Resolved that the committee of the whole hereby recommends to council the acceptance of the corporation of the municipality of Red Lake consolidated financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2017, as prepared by BDO Canada LLP. All in favor? Actually voted. Carried. Okay, next item. Staff report regarding the event center fundraising initiatives.
Okay, so the recommendation before you is the council approved receiving donations and establishing a specific dedicated bank account for the proposed Red Lake Event Center. The Event Center project management team, which is made up of 2 individuals at large in the community, 2 former Event Center committee members when it wasn't part of the municipality. And then there's myself, Councillor Moda, and then we currently have 1 vacancy. Through the Event Center project management team, we felt that it's very important to start looking at, like, from a community perspective of raising funds and how do we do that. So in May of 2018, there was the establishment of a side committee that was it's made up of Janet Hager, Jeanette Harpiak, Alana Setchell, Herb Kamel, Kevin Harlan, and then the municipal representative is Brendan Janak, and also I sit on that as well when possible. The new fundraising committee, they've just established a name, and it's called REACH. Stands for Regional Events, Arts and Cultural Hub. So a lot of work has gone forward with this, and the goal of REACH is a community fundraising target of $2 million. And when I say community, this is aside from any larger corporate industry partners. This is just the community itself, businesses, residents. That's the target. So what they're asking is, and through the Municipal Act, municipalities qualify for donee status. So what that means is we can collect funds, we can collect donations specific to the event center, and we can issue tax receipts. So what the group is asking is that we establish a dedicated bank account, specific reserve account for the proposed event center, and that we issue donation receipts. Any questions?
This was a very interesting report that I read, because I think I've asked around this table at least 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years about when we started talking about the event center and how are we going to ever reach $30 million and so on and so forth. And this committee has sort of just popped up, both of them, to my knowledge. I mean, you probably have known them for a while, I don't know, but it never sort of come through. I don't remember seeing it. You know how when we have committees on the back, you know, we have like the planning board is listed, the names of all the various committees. I didn't remember ever seeing this group. Is this just new, I take it? This group of people here?
The Project Event Center Project Management Team.
Yeah.
That's a committee of council. So that is.
I've never seen it on, when did it come as a committee of council? I've never seen it on the back of our forms that we've got.
I believe a resolution was passed along with a mandate.
Correct, it was. I can't give you the date, but yes.
Okay.
Last year.
I think, are you talking about, by chance, are you talking about the financial committee?
I'm talking
Raise
about
the money.
this committee for this event center, because this is for the special event center, raising money. It's like a reserve fund, right? Only it's got to have a different title.
So the Event Center Project Management Team, that is a committee of council.
Okay, that was that group. They're the ones doing it to the end of the project, right? They're doing it to the end of the building's built? That's
No, they're currently mandated to see it through tender. So
to tender, okay.
through tender. So once the tender is done, documents are done, and you know, so that's
Okay.
the next step. So this REACH group is an offshoot,
Is another subcommittee of this other group.
yes. So it's more of an ad hoc committee, but it's dedicated to raising
Funds, right. And that's the one I've been talking about, or I've been mentioning about how we have to have something in place, because I had mentioned a few times about charity number needs to be, and I thought I was told that we didn't have a charity.
We're not, we cannot have charity status, but through the municipal act, we
But through
have,
this group they could have, can't they?
well,
No?
they could if they filed the paperwork to do that. But we've decided, and we've actually
You're
utilized.
doing just a reserve fund, it's basically with this name on it, or some name on it, for the money that's coming in, if you get any money that comes in for this regional event center, or for an arts center, whatever, it's going into a special, like, reserve, right? Is that what you're doing?
Correct. Yeah, this REACH group is the face of the fundraising. They're the ones that are coming up with various ideas, creating a pamphlet.
Yeah, which is really good, there's nothing problem with that, that's just something that we've been needing. Because I think I mentioned that 3 or 4 times, but it comes back to the idea of a charity number or a charity status. Because I mean, when I was going through, not just if you or somebody just gave money, $5 or $10 or something like that, but if something happened that somebody in their estate left money to, you know how you do Cancer Society card, you put it on your little card when something happens? Well, then this, and they've always had to have charity. They had to have a charity number. I know when Friendship Center went to get it, we didn't have a charity. We had to go and apply for it. And then if anybody leaves money to Red Lake Indian Friendship Center, say children's program, they get a receipt back from the bookkeeper with the number, because you get a charity number on it, and you can use it, or your state can use it for tax purposes, income tax
And we
purposes.
could do this through this,
This same system.
yes,
Okay.
as mentioned, we're qualified as donee status. And we
Okay.
can issue receipts.
So it's exactly the same story. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Moved by Counselor Aaron, seconded by Counselor Goodwill. Resolved that the Committee of the Whole hereby recommends that Council accept staff report number CDNC-18-01 regarding event center fundraising initiatives. All in favor? Carried. And staff report 2018-01 from Human Resources, driving and discipline policy.
The recommendation before you is to adopt the amendments to the safe driving policy and rules of discipline policy. I will note that there's a couple of housekeeping matters within the document that Councillor Middleton brought forward. They're not changes to the intent of the policy. It's just a matter of one word was used incorrectly, like it's stated in section 14.4. The word altercation, when it was in there, when it should be incident. And under section 4.3, we want to include emergency situations as well. So would you like me to go through each change or that is made?
I don't have any problem with reading it and what was produced or given to us.
Okay.
Moved by Councilor Goodwill, seconded by Councilor Barrett. Resolved that the Committee of the Whole hereby recommends the Council accept staff report number HR 2018-01 regarding the driving and discipline policies. All in favor? Carried. And 5.1C, Main Street.
The council directed staff to pull some numbers together for the for council's consideration. On the three projects were the Howie Bay parking area along Howie Street. So that would be to rehabilitate that, or I guess to rehabilitate the area, but create some potential parking spaces. So the infrastructure development coordinator went out there and shot some sight lines, did analysis of the property, and we believe that we can create 10 parking spots in that area, one of which would be a handicap spot. That the cost for this project would be right around $50,000. And just to note that the Main Street Revitalization Program, we have just over $41,000 to utilize. Any questions on that particular project? It would be a two-tiered parking system, so it'd be 5 parking spots at the top if you call the property, and then 5 below. The other suggestion would be, if we were to move forward with this, that a portion of, from the area from this property to the other side of, or near the entrance of the CIBC parking lot, that area be closed off for parking, because there's a bit of a bottleneck there. So that would be a no parking zone, because we're creating 10 more parking spots.
You're talking on the Main Street, right?
Correct, on the Main Street. So it would be on the north side of the street, across, not on the dentist side, on the other side.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Are these spots rented spots, or are they public spots?
Rent. Spots. So currently we have 37 total spots that are rent spots. 7 are vacant at the time, but 4 of which are spoken for by Technology. So there's 3 available in that area. Right now,
Just a point. I think Technology is looking around for the premises. Just making a comment.
When you say spoken for, Mark, does that mean they've said, we'll use those, or does that mean they've said, here's a check?
they said that they want them, but they haven't supplied a check yet.
So in reality, we still have 7 spots available. Pending,
Of course, yes.
okay.
Part of a building permit lines.
So the other project you had asked we looked into was the deck that's across from the Lakeview. That would be to purchase benches, a table and 4 benches. Every spring through the facilities maintenance department, they do a review of the deck itself. It's in good condition. Structurally wise, but to replace the table and the benches would be $3,900. The town square area, and that would be removal of the bricks there, replaced with concrete, removal of the blue fencing, and perhaps replace it with the, so it's consistent with the fencing that's in front of Norseman Park now. And also some benches. That cost would be $22,500.
Is this down in the circle? Must be, eh?
No, that's right across from the,
OPP.
pretty well, the OPP station,
Oh, the
right next to
OPP, okay.
the old post office.
Okay, OPP one.
And that's just a trick to see how long you've been around there.
I just questioned, because I saw work done at the circle. When I came home yesterday from Red Lake, they were doing some brickwork going towards where the parking spot was. Like the old bricks are coming out, it looked like, and they're putting in new ones.
Cement.
Government dock, okay,
Yeah.
fine. Up above the government dock, yeah, you go
So,
around the circle.
Removal of those bricks and putting in.
And
cement.
putting back in new ones.
No, cement.
Oh, cement, so that was coming out.
Yes.
Because there was a pile of bricks sitting there, I knew which way they were going.
Correct. And just good news, we were approved for $5,000 from Frank Cowan and Standard Insurance under their hometown program.
Right.
And so we're approved $5,000 for new seating along Government Dock.
It's very nice. It's a nice gift.
Are the bricks in the town square or in a state where they need to be replaced?
See, we don't have the same, yeah. They're similar to other areas where you're getting heating and stuff. We don't have the problem there, like we had at the Government Dock where people were removing bricks and throwing them around and throwing them in the lake. It's a less used area. But it would have to be addressed at some point, those bricks, and we're moving towards the non-bricks just because of the maintenance.
Those things are crazy, very popular. Safety factor. So none of this was none of this was budgeted for, or hasn't been budgeted for. It's just coming out of those two. We got grants that's coming from someplace. 41,000's coming, and then you had something else to revitalize Red Lake or something, another little pot of money, or did that go on?
That's the Main Street revitalization, that's the 41,000.
That's the 41,000, okay, got it.
And we need to submit a resolution naming a project by the end of the month.
Yeah, I actually passed my law.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question? Just on your parking, clarification. You're talking about a higher level and a lower level? Are you talking about that circle hole that, like there's the Friendship, not Friendship Center, the group of Aboriginal services building there, and then are you talking about in there?
Yeah.
A higher level and the lower level in there to give you 10 spots? Is that what you're talking about doing?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would be a circular, so you'd come off of the main street and you could drive around on top. There would be access for the home that's to the west.
Okay.
There'd still be access, but you could drive up and then back
Do a
around.
circle, and pull in either top or pull in bottom. Okay. That sounds really nice.
It sounds like the only one that will spend the money we have to spend.
Keep in mind though, with that project, you have to name the project, but it doesn't have to be done this year.
Correct.
Correct. So if the parking was the way the direction council wanted to go, that I would recommend we do it in 2019, and then we budget $9,000. Yeah. 2019 budget.
So that's good.
Motion.
Works for me. Go ahead.
I still like your idea on the parking idea of no parking across the street. You know, not from the dentist, you know, where that their sort of high walk is and all. So it's still a bottleneck, it's still a lot of congestion. This parking, new, modern, nice looking parking that I'm seeing in my mind for now 2019 is great. But I'm still thinking, why do we need to park on that side of the road? I know they're going to probably be upset, but there's still spots down by CIBC behind that they could get a tree down in there. Plus they've already asked for some. So I just wonder if it'd be a lot easier going one-sided parking in that section, not all of Howie Street, but just that section where the bottleneck is right now. If we're not going to do this new looking parking until 2019. I'm just wondering if we could solve that problem. How many complaints would you have? Like, to me, I think it would make nice sense, like good sense of getting through there.
Well, it would directly, if we did it today, it would directly impact the Tikanaga. We believe that's who's utilizing that side of the street parking.
How many, do we know? Maybe we have to have a look, take a look, see how many people's parking on it that way anyway.
Couldn't tell you offhand.
I just thought it would look nicer, it'd be easier for the flow of traffic. But if there's no place that they can park, but you say they've asked for 3 and then there is still, no, there's 3 that's empty that nobody's asked for and they've already asked you for some. So that would be 7. So 7 cars would get out of that, could go up there and pay could rent parking. And you would solve a lot less congestion in that section. That's all my thoughts.
So going forward, is that the project we're making?
To me, I don't know. I think that'd be great for 2018. We can't do the other one. We can't do the nice one that you described because we haven't got enough funds to do that until 2019. You need an extra, what did you say? It's going to cost $50,000 and you have, you're missing a little bit of money that you can budget into
Over
2019.
$1,000 then.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the congestion you should get rid of. That's what.
And there'd be some in-kind work as well that would be involved, A and B gravel. But right now, Public Works is doing a great job on Gold Shore. And there's other projects that are budgeted for this year. And we mentioned one earlier, which is the access road to the Log G property.
So will that be direction going forward?
Yeah, I'll do a resolution. That's what $71 that I may have to change that.
Of course, that's fine.
Let me know if that's correct, I'll change it.
Moved by Councilor Gilmore, seconded by Councilor Barron. Resolved that the committee of the whole hereby recommends the council to identify the parking project at 171 Howie Street as part of the Main Street revitalization project. All in favor? Carried. And 7.1. Oh, we're pretty good. The North American Free Trade Agreement.
So this came through AMO.
AMO.
Yeah, we're looking for a resolution to support Canada and Ontario's stance as it pertains to NAFTA. Attached is a
Which is
resolution.
a resolution makes suggestion. Any questions or comments?
Is it something council wants to move forward?
I think we should, yes.
Yes, yeah, we'll put our resolution on for the next meeting.
Okay. And moved by Councilor Goodwillie, seconded by Councilor Barron, resolved that the committee of the whole hereby adjourns to meet again at the following chair. All in favor? Carried.